Supply and demand. Intuitively, we all have an idea how it works. And that's great, because it is such a powerful theory. Maybe the most important theory in economics. The point of understanding supply and demand is to know what happens to the price and the quantity of a good or service when there's a change in the market. And that's important if you're a consumer who wants to make better decisions, an entrepreneur who wants to recognize market opportunities, or you want to understand economic theory. To fully understand the concept, let's first look at the demand. And here we can see the demand for chocolate. And 1,000 people are willing to buy a chocolate bar for $10. When the price goes down to $5, already 10,000 people are willing to buy one. And when the price goes down even more, all the way to $1, now 1 million people are willing to buy a chocolate bar. We can see here, if the price goes down, the quantity demanded increases. Knowing this, we can now draw our demand curve. First notice that in our graph, on the vertical axis, we put the price, and on the horizontal axis, we put the quantity. The demand curve will be a downward sloping line. And that makes sense, right? If the price goes down, quantity demanded increases. If the price goes up, quantity demanded decreases. There's an inverse relationship between price and quantity on the demand side. Price goes up, quantity demanded goes down. Price goes down, the quantity demanded goes up. Now you might wonder, why is it that when the price goes down, there's more quantity demanded? Well, there are three main reasons for that. First one is the substitution effect. Imagine a world where only chocolate and licorice is sold. If the price of chocolate goes up, people will substitute away from chocolate and buy more licorice. When the price of chocolate goes down, people will substitute away from licorice and buy more chocolate. The second reason has to do with income. If you have a certain income and the price of goods goes down, you can buy more quantity of it. Simple. The third reason has to do with satisfaction. If you're really craving chocolate, you're willing to pay a high price for the first chocolate bar, right? But the second bar already tastes a little bit less good, and the third bar gives you even less satisfaction, and the fourth even less. So you're not willing to pay the same premium price as you did for the first bar, for the second, third, or fourth. The only reason you might buy more is when the price goes down, you might demand more quantity. Great, now we understand demand. Let's look at the supply side. And we can see the exact opposite happening here as we saw our demand. Now, 1 million chocolate bars are being supplied to the market if they're being sold for $10. Of course, right? Everyone wants to make chocolate. If they can sell them for $10, there's a lot of profit to be made. Suppliers just ramp up production and make as much as possible. However, when the price goes down to $5, we can see that only 10,000 bars are being supplied to the market. There's less profit to be made. Not so many companies are making chocolate bars anymore. And when the price goes down all the way to $1, only 1,000 chocolate bars are being supplied to the market. Who makes chocolate when they can only sell it for $1, right? There's no profit to be made. They better do something else with it then. So, when the price goes down, the quantity supplied goes down as well. Knowing this, we can draw our supply curve in the supply and demand graph. And it is an upward sloping line. That makes sense, right? If the price goes up, the quantity supplied goes up. And if the price goes down, the quantity supplied will go down. On the supply side, there's a direct relationship between price and quantity. Great. Now we know this, let's look at two market examples to see this graph in work. Here we can see our supply and demand graph. And the first thing we can see is that the equilibrium price for chocolate is $3. The equilibrium point is the point where the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. In other words, where the two lines cross. And for chocolate, we can see that is at $3 or at 3,000 bars. But chocolate is not being sold for $3. No, it is being sold for $5. So from the $5, we draw a line. And we first hit the demand curve. When we drag a line down from there, we can see that at $5, people want to buy 1,000 chocolate bars. It's pretty expensive, so not many people want to buy them.
But if we continue the line from $5, we can see that for $5, when we hit the supply curve, chocolate manufacturers, if we drag a line down from there, are willing to make 5,000 chocolate bars. If you can sell a chocolate bar for $5, they make a lot of profit. So what we can see here is excess supply. There's more supply, 5,000 bars, than there is demand, 1,000 bars. In this case, there's an excess supply of 4,000 bars. We also call this a surplus. What will happen in case of surplus? Well, what will happen when a store has too much stock? They will lower the price. If we lower the price on the demand curve, we follow this line all the way down on the demand curve and until we reach the equilibrium point. When we lower the price, the quantity demanded increases. And when we lower the price from this side, on the supply, the quantity supplied will decrease until, in a free market, they meet again in the equilibrium point, and the market is in a new balance. The opposite of a surplus is a shortage. And the first thing we can see when we look at our supply and demand graph is that the market equilibrium point is still at $3 for chocolate. That is the point where quantity supplied equals quantity demanded. However, chocolate is not being sold for $3. This time it's being sold for $2. So let's draw a line from there. This time we hit the supply curve first. And at the price of $2, chocolate manufacturers are willing to supply the market with 2,000 chocolate bars. Well, that's not a lot, right? But it makes sense. Because at the price of $2, it's not very profitable to make chocolate. However, when we continue our line until we hit the demand curve, we can see that at such a low price of $2, there's a lot of demand, 4,000 to be exactly, for chocolate bars. So what happened here is that there's more demand than supply. There's an excess demand. In other words, there's a shortage. A shortage of 2,000 bars, 4,000 minus the 2,000. What happens in a free market when there's a shortage? Well, the price will rise until it hits the equilibrium point again. And when the price rises on the supply curve, the quantity supplied will increase, because now it's more profitable to make chocolate bars. And what happens when the price will rise on the demand curve? The quantity demanded will fall. And the price will rise until they meet again at the equilibrium point and the market is in a balance. It has to be said that shortage is not the same thing as scarcity. Scarcity is when, for example, you want to buy a painting of Leonardo da Vinci. There are just a few available. Shortage has to do with price. The price is too low and therefore it's not interesting enough to manufacture at such a low price. It's not profitable enough.
Perfect. We now know what happens to the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded when there's a change in the price. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Changes in demand and supply. In the previous video, we looked at how changes in price affect the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied. In this video, we will see that the whole demand or the whole supply curve can actually shift. To see how that works, we'll start at looking at the demand curve.
A demand curve can shift to the left, or in other words, move inwards. This means that at any price, people are going to buy less. Or at any price, there is less quantity demanded. A demand curve can also shift to the right, move outwards. Now, at any price, there's more quantity demanded. Or in other words, at any price, people are going to buy more. There's an increase in demand.
There are 5 shifters of the demand curve. The first one has to do with preference. Let's use apples as an example. Say a new study comes out, saying apples are super healthy. Demand for apples will increase. The demand curve will shift to the right, move outwards. However, when a new study comes out saying apples are super unhealthy, demand for apples will decrease. The demand curve will shift to the left, move inwards. At any price, there's less quantity demanded for apples now. The second shifter of the demand curve is expectations. If we think apples are going to be super expensive a week from now, we might just prefer to buy them now. Demand will increase. Demand curve will shift to the right. The third reason has to do with the price of related goods. Let's say that we always eat apples in our muesli. And when the price of muesli goes down, we will buy more muesli. And if we eat more muesli, we need more apples. Demand for apples will increase. The demand curve will shift to the right. The fourth shifter of the demand curve are the number of consumers. If more consumers move to an area, there will be more demand for apples. Demand curve will shift to the right. The fifth and final shifter of the demand curve has to do with income. If we earn more money, have a higher income, we can buy more apples. Demand for apples will increase. The demand curve will shift to the right. And when the demand curve shifts to the right, at every price, there now is more quantity demanded. Great, these are the 5 shifters of demand. But now let's see what will happen to the supply of apples and the price of apples when the demand curve, in this case, shifts to the right.
We can see that in the supply and demand graph for apples, the equilibrium price is at $3. Let's call this point E. However, now a new study comes out, saying that apples are super healthy, so the demand for apples will increase. The demand curve will shift to the right. Let's call this line D1. But something happened in the market, because when we continue our line from the equilibrium point of $3 until we hit the new demand curve, we can see that suddenly there's more demand than there is supply in the market. And when there's more demand than there is supply, we call this a shortage. And we know what happens in the case of a shortage. The price will increase. So the price will increase over the supply curve, and the price will increase over the demand curve until they meet again in the new equilibrium point E1. So to recap, what happens when the demand curve moves outwards? A shortage. There's more demand than there is supply in this case. And what happens in case of shortage? The price will rise. There will be more quantity supplied, and compared to the old line, there's more quantity demanded at each price.
There are also 5 shifters of the supply curve. The first one is the number of producers. If more people start growing apples, supply curve will shift to the right, meaning at every price there will be more quantity supplied. If less people start growing apples, however, supply curve will shift to the left, meaning at every price there will be less quantity supplied. The second shift of the supply curve has to do with technology. Imagine they find a new way of growing apples. They can do it in just 1 day now. That will increase the supply. As a result, the supply curve will shift to the right. The third reason has to do with government intervention. If the government gives a subsidy for growing apples, there will be more supply. So the supply curve will shift to the right. If the government imposes a tax, however, there will be less supply. Then the supply curve will shift to the left. The fourth shifter of the supply curve has to do with the price of resources. Let's say you need fertilizer for your apple trees, but now the price of fertilizer goes up. Then there will be less supply of apples. So the supply curve will shift to the left. The fifth and final shifter of the supply curve has to do with expectations. Let's say you're an apple producer and you think that the price of apples will go down in a week. Then you might prefer to supply your apples now, because now you get a higher price for it. So then the supply now will increase. The supply curve will shift to the right. Now we know the 5 shifters of supply. Let's see what happens when the supply curve shifts to the right, to the demand, and to the price.
Now let's say there's a huge technological development in the way they grow apples. Instead of weeks, they can do it in a day now. So as a result, the supply curve will shift to the right if we move outwards. At any price, there now is more quantity supplied. Let's call this supply curve 1. Well, What will happen when we follow the equilibrium price again at $3? We can see that this time, because the huge developments, now there's more quantity supplied than there is quantity demanded. So what will happen when there's more quantity supplied than there is quantity demanded? Well, in case of a surplus, the price will go down. We follow the price down on the demand curve and the price down on the supply curve until they meet again at a new equilibrium point. Let's call it 1. So to recap, the supply curve moves outwards, shift to the right. And as a result, at a price point, there's more quantity supplied than there's quantity demanded in the market now, a surplus. The price will go down until they meet again in a new equilibrium point E1, where there's more quantity supplied and more quantity demanded, but at a lower price in the market.
Great! You now know which factors make the supply and demand curve shift. And what happens then? I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Have you ever heard the story from your grandparents how 60 years ago they could buy a house for $10,000? And don't you think it's crazy that nowadays you cannot even buy a decent place for $100,000? Or that 10 years ago, if you wanted to buy a big screen television, you had to pay $4,000 or $5,000. And nowadays you can pick one up for $400 or $500. Inflation and deflation. They have a huge effect on the economy and on you. Really important concepts to understand, and to do so, let's start at the beginning. Big headline in the newspaper: inflation will be 3%. Well, how do they get to that 3%? How do they calculate it? There's such a thing as Consumer Price Index for urban consumers. That's a mouthful. In short, it is the CPIU. What happens is that a basket will be filled full with goods and services. So in there is food and beverages, the price of a loaf of bread, the price of milk. Entertainment, the price of a movie ticket, the price of a theater ticket. Electronics, the price of a camera, the price of a laptop, and the price of housing. Many more goods and services. And what will happen is they take the average price of all those goods and services together. And from there comes the number. Let's say $100. The first basket, they call this the base year, the year they will compare all the years to. And now it is 2015. And they fill that same basket again, full with goods and services. And recognize that it's quite difficult to say, well, a year later, do they use the same laptop, which is cheaper now? And they also weight the items according to importance. So food is weighted heavier than entertainment. And housing, of course, is weighted heavier than electronics, for example. But how much weight should a certain item get? There's a lot of debate about this. Anyway, they fill the basket again, take the average price, and again, they get a number. Let's say $105. What we can see now is that the price of living has increased with $5. And the number they calculate here, it's really important. They use this number to make changes in pensions, in Medicare, and in the cost of living. So inflation and deflation, they really affect the whole economy. Great, now we understand the basics, how they get to the number. Let's see what this means for inflation first. Inflation is the rise in price of goods and services over a longer period of time. Let's look again at our baskets. First, our basket was worth $100, and now it is worth $105. That means a price increase of $5. Or, in other words, a price increase, inflation, of 5%. Well, you might wonder, how can it be that the price went up with 5% in 1 year? Well, there are two main reasons for it. First of all, if there's more demand than supply, so people are willing to buy more stuff than there is stuff supplied, the price will go up. The second reason, if the government prints a lot of money, supplies the economy with a lot of new money, the value of your money goes down. And if the value of your money goes down, the price will go up. Inflation. The government actually aims for 2 or 3% inflation a year. You might wonder, why do they want the price to rise? Well, there are actually some arguments in favor of inflation. First of all, let's say that you want to buy new furniture for your house. But you know that same furniture is going to be 5% more expensive in a year. Will you buy that furniture now? Or will you wait a year? Well, they think you will buy the furniture now. You will spend your money, you will consume, which is good for the economy. And if you know a business is going to make 5% more money next year, because prices rise by 5%, will you invest your money in the business, or will you keep your money in savings? Well, you might be more willing to invest your money in that business. Again, you spend your money. That's great for the economy. Spending is what the economy is driving on. Inflation is also good when you have debt. That might sound weird, but let me explain. Let's say you have $1,000 in debt. And with that $1,000 today, you can buy 2 PlayStation 4s. But there is inflation. And with that same $1,000 a year later, you can only buy 1 PlayStation 4. This basically means that your debt got cheaper. Because, yeah, it's the same $1,000, but first you could buy 2 PlayStation 4s, and now you can only buy 1. So your money is worth less. 3% inflation. It doesn't sound like much, right? But when you add 3% on top of 3% on top of 3%, it adds up. In 24 years, the prices will double. So if you pay $3 for a loaf of bread now, in 24 years you will pay 6. That means your salary has to double in 24 years to be able to afford the same amount of goods and services. So inflation, for who is it really bad? For people with a fixed income. If prices rise, but your income stays the same, you lose purchasing power. Let me tell you a short story about a famous case where inflation destroyed a whole economy. Zimbabwe is a country in Africa where they had hyperinflation. Hyperinflation meaning that the prices went up with more than 11 million %. So if you could buy a loaf of bread in January for $1 Zimbabwe dollar, in March, 2 months later, that same loaf of bread costed billions of dollars. Imagine being a millionaire in Zimbabwe. If you had 5 million Zimbabwe dollars, first you could buy 5 million loaves of bread. 2 months later, you cannot even afford a bread slice, maybe only a few breadcrumbs. What happened is that people started losing trust in the currency, and the government tried to intervene. Cut a few zeros of the currency, but it was too late. Crazy banknotes were going around, and people didn't trust it anymore. So they started paying on the market with gold and silver. But because everything got so expensive, people couldn't afford even to buy normal food anymore. A lot of people were starving. Nowadays, they don't even have the Zimbabwe dollar anymore. They pay with the euro, the US dollar, the pound, a range of more stable currencies. So, in this example, you can see that although the government wants a little bit of inflation, they definitely don't want too much inflation, and definitely not hyperinflation. Because if that happens, it can destroy a whole economy, a whole country. Deflation means a price drop in goods and services over a longer period of time. Let's look again at our baskets. First, a basket was worth $100, but now it is only worth $95. That means there's a price decrease of $5, or in other words, there's a price decrease, deflation, of 5%. Well, how can it happen that the price goes down with 5% in 1 year? Let's use the same supply and demand logic as before. This time, when there's a lot of supply of something, but not a lot of demand, the price will go down. Let me clarify that with an example. Let's say the first week after New Year's you go to the grocery store, and what you see there is a lot of chocolate Santa Clauses. But it's not Christmas anymore, so no one wants to buy a chocolate Santa Claus. What will they do? They put them on sale. So there's a lot of supply of chocolate Santa Clauses, but not a lot of demand. The price will go down, deflation. At first you might think, deflation, great. I can buy more stuff now because it just got cheaper. And that might be true, but deflation has some serious downside. First of all, let's say you want to buy furniture again for your house. But this time you know, in a year it's going to be 5% cheaper. Will you buy it now, or will you wait a year? Well, you might just hold on to your money and wait a year, which is bad for the economy. And if you want to invest in the business, but you know because of the decrease in prices they're going to make 5% less, are you going to invest in them? Or are you going to hold on to your money again? Well, if you hold on, again, bad for the economy. Another reason why deflation is bad is that, let's say you have $1,000 debt. And with $1,000 debt, you can buy 2 PlayStation 4s today. But price will go down. There's deflation. So in a year's time, you can buy 4 PlayStation 4s. That means your debt just got more expensive. So deflation is bad for your debt. Because now you can buy 4 PlayStation 4s. You can buy more things with the same amount of money. It has to be said that deflation doesn't happen a lot in developed economies. Japan is probably one of the only examples where some serious deflation happens. Although it doesn't happen a lot in developed economies overall, in the whole basket of goods and services, it happens a lot in specific sectors. And the sector where it mostly happens, the most famous example of this, is electronics. If you buy a camera, if you buy a laptop, if you buy a phone, you know the price will go down. But you still buy it. And that's why we have to stay critical of the theory as well. Because the theory states that when you know the price will go down, you will not consume. But we just proved that for electronics at least, you will. So this is the theory, but always stay critical. Thank you for watching this video about inflation and deflation. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. The exchange rate market. It's a place where people demand currency and where people supply currency. And it is the biggest financial market in the world. London, the European area, Tokyo, New York. Hundreds of billions of dollars are being exchanged every day. Super important concept to understand. To do so, let's first look at the definition of an exchange rate. That is, how much domestic currency do I need to buy 1 unit of a foreign currency? And a currency can do two things. It can appreciate and depreciate in value. To understand that better, let's look at two examples, and we use the US dollar and the euro to do so. Let's say the euro appreciates. What will happen? Well, first, if we wanted to buy 1 American dollar, we had to pay €1.50 for that. Now the euro appreciates. To buy that same 1 American dollar, we now pay €1.30. What has happened? When the euro appreciates, we need less euros to buy that same 1 American dollar. On the other hand, when the euro depreciates, we know first we have to pay €1.50 for 1 American dollar. Now it depreciates. We pay €1.80 for that same 1 American dollar. So when the euro depreciates, we have to pay more euros to get that same 1 American dollar. And it has to be said that with bilateral exchange rates, meaning two exchange rates, US dollar and euro, when one appreciates, the other one has to depreciate. And when one depreciates, the other one has to appreciate. Great. Now we understand this, let's look at our normal supply and demand graph. With on the vertical axis, the exchange rate, and on the horizontal axis, the quantity of money. At the equilibrium point, we have the exchange rate, and so far nothing crazy. But when we talk about currencies, it's important to understand who's supplying and who's demanding. So let's say this is the supply and demand graph for euros. They're being supplied by the Europeans and demanded by the Americans. When this is the supply and demand graph for US dollars, they are being supplied by the Americans and demanded by the Europeans. Understanding this makes the rest easier. Now you might wonder, who is it that is demanding foreign currency? Well, there are three main groups. First are tourists. Let's say the World Cup of football is in Europe, and American tourists want to come over to support their team. They demand euros to do so. The second group is people who buy foreign goods and services. If Americans love European cars and they want to buy them, they need euros to do so. The third reason has to do with investments. Now let's say American cars are super popular in Europe, and an American car manufacturer wants to open a factory in Europe. He invests in Europe and he needs euros to do so. Now we know that there are three groups who are demanding a foreign currency. Well then, what will happen when there's more demand? Well, when there's more demand, the demand curve will shift outwards to the right, meaning the currency will appreciate. When there's less demand, the demand curve will shift to the left, meaning the currency will depreciate. Now we know who's demanding and what happens. Well then, who's supplying the currency? Well, that's the government, right? Or the foreign government. And a government can do two things. They can supply more money, then the supply curve will shift to the right, meaning the currency will depreciate. Or they can supply less money, meaning the supply curve will shift to the left, and then the currency will appreciate. Now, you might wonder, why would a foreign government want to depreciate the currency? Well, think of the following. Let's say you're a European export business. What will happen when the euro depreciates? For Americans, when the euro depreciates, it's now cheaper to buy European goods and services. So the export business will sell more goods because the currency has depreciated. So when we look at the balance of trade, because the euro depreciated, Europe will export more and America will import more. When we look at the American point of view though, we know when the euro depreciates, the US dollar has to appreciate. So they have a strong dollar. Well, yes, they will import more, but they will export less. Because for Europeans, it's now more expensive to buy American goods. So when we look at a complete balance of trade from a European point of view, when the euro depreciates, they will export more because it's cheaper for Americans to buy. But the US dollar has to appreciate. So they will import less because it's too expensive now. From an American point of view, because the euro depreciated, they will import more. It's cheaper to buy. But because the US dollar has appreciated, they will export less because it's too expensive for Europeans to buy. Well, a famous example of this is China. China keeps the currency low, meaning they keep their goods and services cheap and thereby all their goods and services more expensive. That means they export more, they sell a lot more, which is what they want at the moment. Well, to make this story even more clear, let's look at two more examples. Let's see what happens to the euro and the US dollar when there's a change in the market. So imagine that US tourists love Europe. They all like to come to Europe. What will happen to the euro then? Well, when US tourists come over, they are demanding euros. So demand will go up. And we know when demand goes up, the currency will appreciate. What happens to the US dollar when US tourists come over? They are supplying US dollars to buy the euros. So the supply for the US dollar goes up. And when supply goes up, a currency depreciates. Second example. Imagine that Europe is putting a tariff on US imports, meaning that goods bought from America are now more expensive because of the tariff. What happens to the euro? Well, if goods are more expensive to buy for Europeans, they will buy less. And if they buy less, they supply less euros to do so. So the supply for the euro will go down. And we know when the supply for a currency goes down, the currency will appreciate. What happens to the US dollar then? Well, if Europeans buy less American goods, there's less demand for the dollar. So the demand for the dollar will go down. And when the demand for the dollar goes down, the currency will depreciate. We can see something happening here, that when demand goes up, supply goes up. And when supply goes down, the demand goes down as well. Demand and supply always go up or down together, which makes sense, right? If someone's demanding, the other person has to supply. When there's no demand, there's nothing to supply as well. Great. That was the story about exchange rates. And in a world that's getting more and more connected, as a consumer, a tourist, or a business person, you will come across exchange rate issues a lot. And now you understand it. Perfect. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Interest rates. Governments use it to control whether you spend your money or keep it into your savings account. That means it has a lot of influence on your behavior. So it's a really important concept to understand. To do so, let's start at the beginning. Let's first look at the definition. Interest rates are the price you pay for renting money. Two examples. Let's say you want to buy a new television, and to do so you borrow $1,000 from the bank. The price for borrowing that money is, for example, 5%. This means that in a year's time you have to pay that $1,000 back to the bank, plus an additional $50, the 5%. The other way around, it works the same. If you deposit money in your savings account, basically the bank is renting money from you. In other words, you give the bank $1,000, you say invest it, lend it out to other people, make a profit, but as a return, I want to receive a price. For example, an interest rate of 5%. So what happens is that at the end of the year, the bank will deposit an additional $50 into your savings account of $1,000. And it makes sense, right, that we have to pay a price for renting money. Because in the first example, where we buy a television, the bank cannot make use of the $1,000 for a whole year. That means they have opportunity cost. And they want to see that opportunity cost covered by the interest rate you pay. Now, we might say 5%, that's a lot of money we have to pay just for renting that money. But then we didn't take inflation into account. The $50 we give to the bank in a year is worth less than the $50 is worth now in case there is inflation. So what we want to do, to get a more accurate view of the interest rate, we want to calculate the real expected interest rate. We do that by first looking at the nominal rate. The nominal rate is nothing more than the interest rate the bank gave us, in this case 5%. We do that minus the expected inflation rate. Expected. We don't know what the inflation rate will be in a year, so we'll make a guesstimate. And let's say we'll think it will be 3%. So we do the nominal rate, the percentage the bank gave us, minus the inflation rate. What we expect it will be, the 3%. So what we get from there is 2%. 2% in this case is the real expected interest rate. So first we thought the bank would earn a lot of money by getting 5%, but we see if we take inflation into account, it isn't that much, it's only 2%. Now we take a step in time, we're a year later, and now we don't have to guess about the inflation rate anymore. No, now we know it. And let's say it was higher than expected. The inflation rate turned out to be 4%. We make the same calculation again, but this time we calculate the realized interest rate. So we take the nominal rate of 5% again, and we do that minus the inflation rate, which was higher than we expected, 4%. 5 minus 4 is 1. So we see the bank actually earned a realized interest rate of only 1%. To get an accurate view, again, we have to take inflation into account. The market for borrowing and lending money is basically the same as any market for goods and services. That's why we can draw our normal supply and demand curve. First, let's draw the vertical axis. On there we put the price of money, or in other words, the interest rate. On the horizontal axis, we put a quantity of money that's being borrowed or lended. And let's say this is over a 1-year time period. We draw a normal demand line and our normal supply line, and you can immediately see a few things. First of all, when we look at the demand line on the top left, we can see that people who want to borrow money, who demand money, are willing to pay a high interest rate for the first few dollars they borrow. And if we think about it, this kind of makes sense, because in our example, we borrowed money to buy a television. We borrowed it with a goal. We wanted $1,000, and we're willing to pay a pretty high interest rate for that. Of course, we would like an additional $1,000, but we're not willing to pay that high of an interest rate for it. When you look at the bottom left of the supply curve, you can see that banks want to loan out the first dollars for a pretty low interest rate, which makes sense as well. The first few dollars for a bank, they have low opportunity cost. But as they lend out more money, the quantity they lend out increases, they want and they expect a higher interest rate for it, a higher price of money, because the opportunity costs are high. And again, the market for borrowing and lending out money is exactly the same as any other good. So when the supply increases, the interest rate goes down. When the demand increases, the interest rate goes up. And this is the system the government uses to control whether we spend our money or keep it into our savings account. And to make that more clear, let me tell you a short story. Imagine the following. The government is sitting in a car. And when the government puts the pedal down, the car will go faster. And when the pedal go up, the car will slow down. And the same is true for the economy. When the government puts the pedal down, lowers the interest rate, the car will go faster, the economy will go faster. Because with a low interest rate, well, there's no incentive to save your money, right? And if you don't put money into your savings account, well, then you might just prefer to spend it. And if you spend your money, that is what makes the economy grow. That makes the economy go faster. On the other hand, when the government lets the pedal go up, hires the interest rate, the car will slow down, the economy will slow down. Because with a high interest rate, you suddenly have an incentive to save money. And if you put money into your savings account, you cannot spend it. And not spending your money is what makes the economy slow down. There's one final important interest rate concept, and that are compound interest rates. Let's imagine the following. Say you put $10,000 into your bank account, and the yearly interest rate is 5%. That means by the end of the first year, you get an extra $500, 5% of the 10,000, making your bank account $10,500. Over that you get another 5%, an extra $525, making it $11,025. And over that you get another 5%, an extra $551.25. And over that you get an extra 5%. Well, you understand it by now. They say compound interest rates are the most important way to grow your pensions. Important concept. Perfect. That was the topic of interest rates. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Opportunity cost. We all have to make choices, and from choices, opportunity costs arise. Opportunity costs are the option you decide to not do. So, you're watching this video now. You're not reading Facebook. The opportunity cost for watching this video is reading Facebook. And it happens everywhere. Governments who decide how to spend their taxes. Shall we build a hospital or shall we build roads? Well, if a government decides to build a hospital, the opportunity costs for that are building roads. As students, if a student decides to go to university, the opportunity cost of going to university are not having a full-time job or full-time wage. Well, to understand opportunity cost even better, let's first look at the production possibilities frontier. That's a mouthful. In short, that is the PPF.
This is the PPF for a small country. They pick apples and they catch fish. The PPF is telling us all the production possibilities between picking apples and catching fish they can make. And the black line shows the maximum efficiency at which they can do both. So they can pick 100 apples, but then there's no time to catch fish. However, they're still working on maximum efficiency. They can catch 5 fish. There's no time to pick any apples then, but still they're working on maximum efficiency. They can also, for example, choose the production possibility of catching 2 fish, and then there is time to pick 90 apples. Maximum production efficiency on the black line. However, it's also possible that in the graph the country is here, for example, they catch 2 fish and pick only 40 apples. They're not working hard enough. If they work harder, they can catch the same 2 fish, but also pick 90 apples. It has to be said that it's not possible to be outside the production possibility frontier graph. You cannot be more efficient than maximum efficiency. So, the goal for a country is always to be on the black line, to be as efficient as possible. Inside the graph, they're not working hard enough. And outside, that's just not possible. Now, let's look what can happen to a PPF. It can shift. And a PPF can shift inwards. Well, that wouldn't be very good for a country, right? The PPF shifts inward, because now they lose fish and they lose apples. But it can happen. For example, when there's a natural disaster. It can also shift outwards. And that is great. Maybe there's some technological advancement and they're more efficient in picking apples and more efficient in catching fish. That would be great for a country. They increase their production. The third thing that is possible is that the PPF increases on one axis. So maybe they pick the apples the same way, but they found a better way to catch the fish. So the PPF moves outward on one axis. And that's still great for the country because the production still increases. Quickly recap the PPF. Being on the curve is working at perfect efficiency. Being inside it, the graph, means they should work a little bit harder, and it's not possible to be outside. PPF curve can shift inwards, for example a natural disaster, or outwards, when there is a technological advancement.
Here is all the data from the PPF graph. And let's imagine we want 100 apples. We're in scenario 6. We can see that when we want to pick 100 apples, there's no time for us to catch a fish. But we need our proteins, right? So let's say we want to catch at least one fish. We go from scenario 6 to scenario 5. But it's an easy fish to catch. It's in a lake close by the camp and we can catch it with a simple fishing rod. It doesn't take us too much time. So to do so, from scenario 6 to scenario 5, we only have to give up 10 apples. Let's say we really like it and we want to catch an extra fish. This is a bit harder. We need to go to a lake further and we need a better fishing rod to catch it. So it takes us more time. From scenario 5 to scenario 4, where we have 2 fish, this time we have to give up 20 apples. Let's say we want to catch a third one, and this one is even harder. Now we can see from scenario 4 to 3, we have to give up 25 apples. From 70 to 45. What you can see is that with every additional fish we catch, we have to give up more apples. The opportunity costs are increasing. And we could see that in the graph as well, right? In a bow-shaped curve with a steep ending. Every additional fish we catch, the opportunity cost increase. We have to give up more apples. Let's look at one more example. Let's say we catch 100 fish. When we do so, there's no time for us to pick any apples. But let's say we want at least 15 apples. So we go from scenario 1 to 2. What are the opportunity costs for that? Well, to have time to pick 15 apples, we have to give up 1 fish. Great! That was the topic of opportunity cost. Every time you make a decision, there will be opportunity cost.